Hey, so the big question for today is, how do our cells gain and use energy? So here's a basic outline of cell energy, shown by this cute little light bug here. So we've learned already that all of Earth's living organisms originally get their energy from the sun, and special cool things called plants take the sun's energy, and during the process of photosynthesis, they turn that solar energy into stored chemical energy in sugar. And then one thing we haven't really learned much about yet, but we're going to go into soon, is the process of respiration, which is what we do every day all the time in our bodies when we break down those sugars into something that our cells can use more easily, and that's ATP. So the energy from ATP really is what our bodies or our cells every day constantly are using for life's activities. So a quick review of energy. Energy is the ability to do work. So cells need energy for lots of different things. See if you can come up with any. What do our cells do? What do they need energy for? Well, one thing we learned about recently is active transport. So moving good things into the cell, moving other things out of the cell. That requires energy. Building our big macromolecules like proteins, DNA, that takes energy. For one cell to split into two and make more cells, that takes energy. Keeping our bodies warm, that takes energy. So there's so many things constantly that your cells have to do, and it all takes energy in the form of ATP. So there's different types of energy. One we talked about was solar energy. And then the other one is chemical energy. That's what would go in here. Chemical energy is stored in what part of a chemical compound? What do you think this one is? It's going to be bonds. Chemical energy is stored in the bonds between atoms in a chemical compound. The most common compound used to store and release chemical energy, we just talked about it, it's not sugar. Right now we're talking about ATP. So sugar stores energy for a long term, but the type of energy that our cells need all the time is ATP. So here's a big outline of an ATP molecule. Before we take a dive into that, let's watch this quick video from Bill Nye. Skip the ad. Sorry about that. Oh, well, great. Why'd you do it again?
We get the oxygen that we need from the air we breathe. That's respiration. But there's another type of respiration that happens in our cells called cellular respiration. Our cells combine chemicals in the food we eat with oxygen to store energy in another simple chemical called ATP. ATP. Adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate. Here. Once your body has oxygen, it can make adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate. Phosphate from almost any food. It could be hot dogs, spinach, or crab meat. If you like that kind of thing. Your body uses ATP as a sort of chemical battery. It stores energy and then lets it go. Stores it and lets it go. Just keeps going and 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 going.
All right, thanks, Bill. So back to ATP, adenosine triphosphate. The adenosine part of the word comes from these two groups right here. So right here we have adenine, which is a nitrogenous base. So this is actually one of the things that your nucleic acids are built out of. If you guys remember, probably from another class in the past, in your DNA you have 4 bases. A matches with T and C matches with G. So here's the A, adenine. And then right here we have a sugar called ribose. And so these two together are adenosine. And then the really important part is right here, the phosphate groups. There are 3 of them, thus the prefix tri here. So triphosphate means there are 3 phosphate groups, just like a tricycle has 3 wheels, right? So these phosphate groups store a lot of the chemical energy for ATP. So what's this word here? What does ATP store? It stores energy in the bonds between its phosphate groups, but mostly this last one here between the 2nd and the 3rd phosphate. So proteins can release the stored energy. So these are special proteins in your cells, right? Different proteins do different things, and so some of these can use this stored energy by breaking off this 3rd phosphate group. And once they break that off, the energy from that bond can be used by those proteins for doing something else. So I just put here energy for cellular processes, whatever it needs to do. Once that last phosphate gets broken off of ATP, then the molecule becomes ADP, or adenosine diphosphate, di meaning 2. So this is ADP, adenosine with 2 phosphates. And then later your cell can recharge this molecule, so it's kind of like a battery that lost some of its charge. And your cell can fill it back up, make it a fully charged battery again by adding in some more energy and another phosphate group. So ADP can become, again, ATP. And then that last phosphate gets lopped off, becomes ADP again, and gets recharged. And it gets used and recharged all the time. So fun fact, a working muscle cell in your body makes and uses about 10 million molecules of ATP every second. That's crazy. So I've got a cool video here that I watched when I was in college, and it totally blew my mind. So it's called The Inner Life of a Cell. Let's see if we can skip this video. So this is a close-up of cells in your body. Right now it's the bloodstream. This is a white blood cell that's moving along in your bloodstream. And there's a little protein sticking out of the cell membrane of the white blood cell, and there's a little protein sticking out of the membrane of the walls of your blood vessels. And these are kind of like little magnets. They're attracted to each other. So this cell moves along your blood vessels by constantly attaching at one end and undoing at the other end these little bonds between the proteins. Here's a cell membrane with some different stuff sticking out of it, proteins and little rafts and things. So all these big cool folded structures are protein. Here's your lipid bilayer. So remember that moving stuff around in the cell and moving things in and out of the cell uses ATP. Basically anything that gets moved in your cell, it takes energy to move it. bonding between different proteins taking place. Now going in on the inside of the cell, you're going to see lots of different proteins interacting. I think it's just really pretty and really cool to look at them like this. There's some cool formations of different, it's like protein strands getting put together. So building new macromolecules takes energy. Sorry. Ooh, here's some filaments. This is part of the cytoskeleton. Remember, that's something that gives structure and support inside the cell, and it also helps with transportation. So these things kind of get assembled. They're like little magnets. They stick together. They like to make these long chains of things. Long fibers running throughout your cell. And then this guy comes in and just cuts it off. When your body needs to recycle stuff, maybe go in a different direction. So we saw this microtubule being built, and we're seeing it come apart. Now this guy's really cool. This is a motor protein right here. He's got these little feet that just walk along the microtubules, and he carries this big vesicle around the cell. So remember, when something needs to move from one side of the cell to the other, it'll get put in a vesicle like this and get carried by one of those motor proteins along a microtubule down to the other side of the cell. That takes a lot of energy. Here's our mitochondria. These things are really good at making ATP in our cells, so we're going to learn more about them in a little bit. Alright, that's probably good enough. You get the idea. There's lots of stuff going on in your cells all the time, and most of it requires energy in the form of ATP. So here's a link that'll help you review some of the top uses for ATP. I'm not going to go into that right now. You can click on this and learn about how your cells use energy for making new chemical bonds, building new things, changing the shape of a protein so that it can do cool functions, as well as pumping things across the cell membrane. So, question, why don't we just eat a whole bunch of ATP? You know, why couldn't we just pop a bunch of ATP pills all day and not worry about all the rest of it? Well, it doesn't work that way. So ATP can't store energy for long periods of time. It would break down. So it's constantly being built and then used and recycled, so charged and uncharged, back and forth all the time. So cells use the energy stored in food like this donut, which has a lot of glucose, to make ATP. So your body's constantly breaking down sugars, fats, proteins, all the things in the food that you eat. It's breaking those down and turning it into ATP. And this happens constantly all day long. So quick review, why is ATP useful to cells? See if you can come up with an answer. What can the energy from ATP be used for? And where do living things get the energy they use to produce ATP? Let's see what you think.